panel. So I'd like to welcome to the stage, please, a group of people. The moderator will be Pascal Clarisse, if he's here, please. And then we've also got Don S. Kim back to the stage from G-Star, Jefferson Valadares, Lauri Yaviletto, and Sabrina Carmona are going to take part.
Hello.
Pascal?
Yes.
Hi, thank you. Well, if you can introduce your panel.
Check. Hello, everybody. I'm Pascal Clarisse, and I will be moderating this great panel about So You Think You're Global. We've just watched a few talks about the Middle East market, about the Korea market. The premise is, now taking a look at the world, the premise is that we are all available globally through the App Store and Google Play to 170 plus countries. And from a different position in the world, it may be at some point that with the millions of downloads coming in, we start looking like we are global hits or global brands, like Angry Birds or Clash might be. And I thought, well, if global is an aggregation of locals, then are we really local hits in all these continents that we are available to? And to talk about that today, we have quite a multicultural panel. Maybe you can all introduce you, starting with Sabrina, who comes from Brazil and lives in Sweden.
Hi, how are you guys? Okay, they are alive and well. I hope you're not super hungry. We'll try to make this entertaining. So like you said, I'm Sabrina. I'm a producer at King in Stockholm office. I am from, there you go. I am from Sao Paulo, Brazil. I lived in Mexico City. I lived in Santiago in Chile. I lived in Hamburg in Germany. I worked at Square Enix Asian. I worked at Behavior Canadian. Worked at a German company. Now I work at a Swedish company that has offices all over the world. So I've been around a little bit, and I'll be happy to share my experiences.
Hey all, my name is Lauri Järvilehto. I'm CEO and co-founder of Lightyear, a learning game studio. We started about 2 years ago with Peter Westerbacka, Niklas Herf, and Lauri Kontori. And we've set out with the goal to make learning games that would be as much fun to play as the best games in the world. Our first game, Big Bang Legends, we started soft launching a little more than half a year ago. We wanted to start with something easy to learn, so we started with particle physics, teamed with CERN, the institution in Geneva, and we've now officially launched it in 3 countries, and it's been like the #1 educational game on all 3, and in Finland actually was the most downloaded game for the whole launch week, which was kind of nice. I think the first time ever in the history of learning games, so getting to a good start.
Hi, my name is Don S. Kim. I'm the CEO of the Advanced Cyber Entertainment, which is located in Germany, near Frankfurt. And then I've been living in Germany for 25 years, and then I'm right now doing some investment on a gaming studio and then some startups, and then also the bridging role between the Korean, Asian culture and the European culture as well. So I would like to meet more people here in Finland because, very impressive young developers, and yeah, nice to meet you.
Hey, my name is Jefferson. It's the 3rd name there. Usually I have the longest name, but like this guy beat me this time. I'm really disappointed. But I'm originally from Brazil as well, which I guess a lot of people in the panel did not know. We have it's multicultural, but it's actually more Brazilian than anything else.
Yeah.
I did live here in Finland as well. Like 10 years ago, I used to work for Digital Chocolate. Now it's super cool to be in Finland. Back then it was just cold. Nobody talked about that stuff anymore. But now I live in the US. I lived in London as well. I work for Bandai Namco, which is a crazy Japanese company. Before that, I worked for EA, which is like a crazy American company. I worked in like multiple studios, with studios in Arctic Circle, China, Australia. I think not Africa. Maybe there's one, and not Antarctica actually. So I'm missing 2 of the continents, but working on that. So if you guys know any studios in Antarctica, let me know. Looking for them.
Hello everyone. Thank you for visiting us. My name is Stanislav. I'm from Mail.ru and came here from Russia. Mail.ru is one of the biggest internet companies in Russia that consists of lots of different companies like inside. And we have some expertise on having business global. While it's true that most of our businesses are focusing on Russia, mostly thanks to our social networks that are dominating in Russia, like VK and OK. We also are famous for operating games on worldwide basis, like Warface, or doing some businesses like ride sharing and food delivery and etc. So, yeah.
All right, so we're gonna go at the world, continent by continent, and exchanging views, sometimes mistaken or not. We're going to start with the biggest market, the biggest up market in the world, and that would be Asia. So earlier today, Don already spoke about Korea. We all know about big China and how it's booming over there, but around it, there is actually a story to tell also, especially if you look at esports in Thailand, in Vietnam, in Indonesia. All these markets are really booming, and then maybe Don, you can start by giving us a summary of your opinion, and then since we are lucky to have Jefferson from Bandai Namco, maybe you can chime in into that as well.
Okay, and currently the mobile gaming market in Asia is exploding, mainly due to the Chinese market. But there is some the pitfall that if you just rush into the market, there's so many competition and there's so many the traps on the way. So it's not really easy to get into this market. That's what I learned, that many of my Western friends who wants to get into the Eastern market, just thinking that they are all the same market, and the gaming market is so in the international, everybody understands everybody, but actually in the business way it was not. So many of them have failed, not in a good way. Some make a big fail, some make a small fail, but I think that when you want to get into the Asian market, you really have to understand the culture, and then I rather recommend you to visit there and then meet the people and then understand how they play, what they play, in what circumstances they use the mobile phone and something like that. I think the people in the Korea, China, or even between these three, China, Korea, Japan, and even these three countries, there are many different differences. And then because of the differences, if you bring the Japanese game directly to the Korea, or the Korean game directly to the China, then that will fail. So I think understanding culture is really crucial. I mean, I'm right now representing the G-Star right now. That is the gaming exhibition, and I really not only for those brands, but for your own sake, that I really recommend you to visit one of these, the game exhibition before you dare to publish anything, in those markets.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, Asia is difficult for Westerns. It's also difficult for other Asians. Like, so my company's from Japan, obviously, and we're like big in Japan. If you pardon me. We are a company, and a lot of people know this because Namco is known in the West more for the arcade, like that kind of stuff. But like, we're really, like, the focus of the company really is on licensed IP. So most of our big products are like anime products, right? So like Dragon Ball is our biggest game, Naruto, One Piece. There's a lot of those we do. And actually, a lot of our success in Asia is due to the fact that we control those licenses. So we have actually a big market in China. We have a big office there, which has been growing every year. It's probably our biggest growth in revenues coming from China. But as you guys know, it's complicated to be there. So we have a big office there, but we publish everything with Tencent. Like we don't do anything. I mean, we kind of convert the games. We get the games from Japan, kind of change them because they need to be completely different in China, and then we release them in partnership with Tencent. Korea has like a pretty good alignment with our IP, so a lot of our stuff works well in Korea. Our biggest game in Japan actually is not big anywhere else other than in Korea because they like have similar tastes and kind of cultural backgrounds. Yeah, and we kind of have spotty, coverage in some of the other places like Taiwan, etc. Gundam is like pretty big in Southeast Asia. Some of the stuff is not, so it kind of depends on. In our case, really follows the IP. IP is not amazing for every market, but definitely in Japan, like if you're thinking about Japan, trying to give the point of view local, like IP is king. So like people there really want, that thing that they, they're big fans. Now in Helsinki has Moomin cafes, but like the first one I went to was in Tokyo, and it's an IP from Finland, but like those guys consume it more than here probably, and they're really big IP consumers. Other than that, if something is like a big, massive event, then they'll pay attention to that too. But like, it's a very difficult market to get to because they're very concentrated focus. So everybody likes the hot thing, and then if you're hot, it's great, and if you're not, like you're in trouble. So it's kind of a difficult market to break into. Yeah, I'm curious. The one thing I would love to hear, particularly from the Russian point of view, is like, we all know about China, how difficult China is because, the regulations and all those other things. And all I keep hearing is that Russia is going in the same way. It's getting more and more complicated to go there. Like, you got to have, local servers, local presence, like all those other things. So I'm curious to see, like, what are you guys' point of view on that?
Yeah. I think that you mentioned that it's a challenging market, but from Russian point of view, it's not a very big difference compared to other Asian markets because all of them are challenging, and for all of them you need like separate strategy and working with local partners, identifying the correct leads or like best relevant agencies or companies that will guide you. So I think it's not very anything special about this from our point of view, as far as I know.
So to summarize, there's a big cultural gap, which might be the last frontier in this world to cross. So all the frontiers are gone, but there is still the cultural exchange. Something very interesting that I think was said is that we look at it as Asia, but actually China, Japan, and Korea are completely different, and so is Indonesia, and so is Thailand, which are big markets as well. And that's why a lot of successful European or US companies tend to go with partners unless they have the size, scope, and wealth of a Bandai Namco. Then they open offices.
Oh, but even as we went with partners in China, so we have, we're big, but we still, I would say if there's one thing to take away from this, the local partnership is like really important. Even if you build your local presence, you still want to have like strong partners where you go.
And I guess the principle of opening an office is also still to go at that cultural gap, because you will hire local people who know what they're doing. Now, going into Europe and US, I guess there will be the same kind of cultural gap. For example, Don, how do you view the Western market as a Korean?
Well, Western market is, definitely that the people in the US or Asian doesn't understand the European market, right? And from between the Finnish and the Italian, we understand that there is a huge cultural gap, but the people outside of the Europe doesn't understand that, right? I mean, they all look the same. I mean, the Eastern looks the same, but to them, they all look the same. So funny for us, who live in Europe, but outside of the Europe, they don't understand this kind of delicate cultural things. Even the facial look is different, but they don't recognize that. It is so funny. So I mean, you have to imagine that how difficult that is to get into the Asian market. To you that every Asian looks the same, but for us, the Chinese, Japanese, or the Thai, they all a little bit different, think different in a way. So, I mean, between the U.S. and then the Europe is between the Donald Trump and somebody else. So I think you gotta understand. We all share the same understanding. Yeah.
When you moved to Europe, Sabrina.
Yes.
Were you also very surprised? Was it also a cultural shock coming from Brazil?
Yes. Absolutely. First place I lived in Europe was Germany. And then I moved to Sweden. In my mind, I was like, yeah, they're both cold and blonde, so it's going to be the same. It was absolutely different. And everything, right? I think it goes from how you work, the work culture, it's very different. The market is different. Also, the focus or how the companies structure themselves are also different. What they're looking at or what they want to achieve is also different. Of course, now I work at King. It's a big company. I think you've heard of it. We have some big games, and it's just, it's like, you know, you finally play in the big league, and then you see the massiveness and all the resources that you could have. So that is something that I couldn't even imagine that it would get a fraction of that at all. So I think adaptation, especially, I can only speak for myself. I have a lot of Brazilian friends. As you can see, we're everywhere, so you can't escape. But it's also very difficult for us to adapt into cultures that are not so sociable. And, you know, don't get me wrong, he talked about Italy, and I have some Italian friends, and even who are in my team and everything, and we are still different, sociable. I mean, it's just different, and we look for different things. So, quite the shock, and it takes time to adapt. So I lived, like I said, I lived in 5 different countries, but even moving from Brazil to Mexico, it was completely different. Mexico to Chile, it was completely different again. So that there's no...
It's even a different Spanish between Mexico and Chile.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the Chileans there, but you do not speak Spanish. I lived there, I can say that.
The only true Spanish is Colombian Spanish,
Agreed.
as far as I'm concerned.
Agreed.
But, all right. And Lori, actually, because we just talked about how different the Italians are, the French are, the Germans, the Finnish, but you had the chance to do a soft launch event in a country that nobody ever speaks about, which is Slovakia. Can you tell us a little bit about why small countries might also matter, and there's also a cultural difference there?
So yeah, so we one of the soft launch countries and one of the countries that we've been doing some test marketing has been Slovakia, like you said. I think, you know, the main reason why we chose Slovakia is it has 5 million people and it starts with an S, like Singapore and Suomi. So what actually happened was that, so Peter, who's our brand breaker, he was basically like talking with the president of Slovakia and like just chatting out about this whole idea that we started this company because we want to scale this Finnish ideal of inclusivity in education. And then we got access to basically to be able to communicate about what we're building to Slovakian schools and figuring it out there. And we visited them and we tested it out in schools, and it's really interesting to see that regardless of the culture where we've been testing the game, we get pretty much the same effects, you know, regardless of language barriers or like, you know, even kids' ages don't seem to matter that much. You get this sort of like, you know, you go to a school, you play just the game and kids are just blown away by it. And I think Slovakia has been really interesting because it's like, on one hand, like it's a pretty similar demographic to these other areas where we've been tested, about roughly the same size, about the same sort of age demographics, but at the same time it's actually the whole sort of East European Slavic sort of like you know, congenital blues, if you may, like, you know, it's kind of it gives an interesting spin to how to fit the product. But I think, like, at the end of the day, I think our experiences in having tested in quite different kinds of territories and different kinds of cultures has been that I think, like, I think we are sort of overanalyzing a little bit too much about it. Like, you know, that people, like, these cultural differences and how we look like and how we talk and, like, you know, whether you can understand a certain dialect of Spanish or not. And it's basically superficial compared to the fact that at the end of the day, we're talking about the business that's ultimately a creative business. And I think deep down, I feel, at least like in all the, like, territories that we've been operating in, people are people, and you need to have something like, you know, something that's basically nothing short of magical to be able to touch people. And when you have that, it doesn't really matter what language people speak or what they look like or what their gross national product happens to be. When you get the magic in there and you get the magic just communicated to people, I think that's the sort of the key to moving forward.
And you come from a more of a creator background. So I hear what you're saying, which is more like football is a universal language and so can be gaming or music. So at the product level, you're trying to make something that resonates with 7 billion human beings. And I guess our considerations are more business and marketing. How do we position that now? How do we sell that great gem that has been created? This being said, do you think doing something with the president of a country is somewhat easier in a small nation than it would have been in the US or in Russia? You don't bring Putin that easily, I guess?
No, I don't know. I mean, unless it's like, a crazy president of, a country located south of Canada, I don't think it really makes a difference. In that particular case, I think all bets are off. But otherwise, I think just communicating with people, going through all various kinds of layers of people you can get in touch with. I think it all boils down back to the fact that, when you shake hands with people, they're human beings, and when you find that connection, it doesn't really matter what's on your business card or what kind of office you happen to live in. Once again, with that one small caveat, if you happen to have an opossum as your hair, that might make a difference.
So you made a good point about the creative being the thing that kind of connects everything. So in our case, that's the IP. So the IP we have. It's usually, because it's been built over the years, then some countries like that IP, and that's kind of like our entry into those places. So I'll give the example of Dragon Ball is our biggest game. It's the same game. Actually, it's a separate version in Japan and another version for the rest of the world. But it's really the same game. I think the difference where if you watch the game, on the charts of that game, it actually wasn't doing amazing at launch, and only a few years later, actually maybe almost 2 years in, that we started reaching the numbers we have now. And I think part of that is because we started customizing the experience for each region. So, and not just the game, but also the marketing. So, I don't know if you've ever seen the advertising for something in Japan, but it's 8 fonts, blink, everything yelling at you, and then and we're okay, we can't really do that in the US, and we had to kind of take out, 1 font per screenshot, please, and then just a single image. So we had to kind of clean that up, and then even the things we sell. So in the US, people really like power, and I'll talk in general terms about Dragon Ball, but that probably applies to other things too. But people really like the power of the characters. They care about what the numbers. Whereas in Europe, people prefer more the looks or the card. The art made a big difference when people are going to decide. Obviously, they look at the numbers too, but they kind of like to look at the art. So we had to kind of just. And whereas in the US we're more focused just on the numbers, don't show me the card, I just want to see the number, right? And we had to kind of adjust that on our marketing, on our community messaging, on the pacing of events, on when we announce an event, because in Japan the event just comes, because everybody's playing the game anyway, so we don't tell it ahead of time. But in the US we got to remind people hey, the event's coming, it's almost here. Because there's so much stuff going on in the US that people don't pay attention, and if you don't kind of remind them all the time, then they're not going to be there when you want it. So those are the things that, even though you have this IP that connects everything, they're all Dragon Ball fans in the end. But we had there's different styles and behaviors and things that you got to take into account for, even if you happen to have the creative center that works everywhere.
Yes, please.
I'm regarding the the common things and the differences between the cultures, and especially regarding the languages, that the big countries like the United States or the France or Germany, they don't like to speak other languages. They are very lazy to listen to the other languages. But whereas the smaller countries like Slovakia, Finland, or the Netherlands, they are used to learning the new languages. They have to. So I mean, they don't have barriers to the foreign languages. So I think there are some big differences between the big countries and the smaller countries. Whereas in Asia, most of the countries, big countries like China, Korea, or Japan, they are the Western languages are very different, whether it's English or the Japanese or the even between the China and then the Korea. I mean that they don't speak each other's languages, so you need to communicate with them, in their languages. Otherwise, it's very difficult, penetrate into the market. Or you have to develop the game which doesn't need the language at all. So that is the kind of a strategy you have to deal with. And then also regarding the Korean market, especially that the gamers are very, very demanding. So they complain a lot of different details. So if you don't, deal with them very carefully, then you create a lot of the anti, fans. So,
yes, that is something that I've heard a lot. That
right.
In Asia, customer support, if you don't answer within 15 minutes, your service is shit, if I may use some French.
Exactly,
here.
and then also there are so much competitions, so. That if you don't do it right, they just easily move to the other game. So it's really difficult to succeed in those countries.
It's game as a service, as a paroxysm over there. It's really a service, and it's perceived as such. And in between Asia and Europe, you have Russia, which is also kind of a thing on its own and ignored by many, although it's in the top 4 or 5 top generating app markets in the world.
So yeah, and you like to hear more about Russia, right? That was the question.
So at the risk of collusion, can you tell us a little bit more, what are we missing to enter Russia?
Right, yeah, I'd love to, and thank you for having me here. So, as you already said, Russia is a very big country. It's top 5 market in the world on mobile, with 80 million mobile phone users. And it's funny that sometimes you do nothing at all, and you still have a large user base coming from Russia. Take big companies like Rovio, like Seriously, like, I don't know, Outfit 7. They don't invest a lot on user acquisition in Russia, but Russia stands for one of top 3 market for them by user base, just because they have good games and they built strong, recognizable brand. Around 70% of those 80 million mobile phone users are Android. So Russia is 70% around, is heavily Android country. And it's important to mention that far less, I think, less than 10% of them speak English. So in order to be successful on this market, you have 2 options. First is you have to create a very simple game like Kazarop without any text or words, or you have to work with agencies or companies to localize your text, because it will be hard to be successful without users understanding your language. Speaking about specialties that unique things. There are not so many countries in the world where Facebook is not dominating. For example, there is China with WeChat as the main platform for everything. In Russia, there are 2 main social networks and messengers, VK and OK, that luckily belongs to one company that you have will need to deal in order to be successful. And speaking about Russia, it's important to mention that Russia is a very strong PC market, with Steam is dominating, and it has a very strong PC esports community that are playing lots of esports games, and lots of companies with strong brands, with, for example, Pac-Man, Hello Jefferson, and from Bandai Namco, or Sonic from Sega, are doing very good in Russia as well, thanks to recognizable brands. Speaking about some numbers, Russia is, as I mentioned, top 5 on user base by user base, and it's top 11th by revenue in the world, with whole game market is valued at $2 billion last year, and you see a gap between downloads and user and revenue. That's why developers rely not only on in-app purchase but on advertising as well in this particular region. And last thing to mention, I think, are main genres that are very popular in Russia. It's social games, mostly match 3 and puzzle, and mid-core games like shooters, like MOBAs, like strategies, RPG. And I have a special question to Sabrina. Luckily, we are on the same panel. Match 3 games are very popular in Russia. Seriously, Rovio, lots of local game developers, but not very. It's not a strong market for King for some reason. So King has built a very strong brand, and you are dominating on Western markets, on Latin America, but not in Russia. I wonder what is the reason for that.
I have no idea, to be completely honest, because I work at King for about a year and 3 months, and I do not work with the Candy Crush franchise or any live game. I'm on the new games team, so I can't answer that, to be honest. Okay. I don't know the answer.
This being said, Sabrina, while talking about unexplored territories, another big one is Brazil. So you've talked about how it is to come to Europe, but we tend to ignore, I think all of us, the Latin America opportunity, and because it's a young continent, so it's growing and it's booming. Can you say a few words about the opportunity over there to do business?
Sure. It's huge, and I mean, last year I was here talking about Latin America, and it made $4 billion in video games. It grew 20% year over year, so it is a lot. Usually people in Brazil, you see the carriers, they are very expensive and they have like different promotions, and to have a phone is super expensive. So people in Brazil have two, because they have carrier A and carrier B. So I call to my friends with carrier A, but I use carrier B because my boss has that. So they have a lot of mobile phones. The penetration is enormous, and they actually pay and consume. Clash Royale is top, Candy Crush is top. They play every single game that most of the world plays. The difference is that, and I really like the talk before, there's a big difference between translation and localization. If you come to Brazil with Portuguese from Portugal, you will be trashed. I don't understand that. It's just you, and we feel offended by it.
Of course you are.
And the thing is, it's not that because we don't want to play games in English, it's just that we don't have education. If you think about it, it's not that strong. This is a miracle, by the way, but it's not that strong. And it's not for everyone, and it's very privileged for you to learn a different language. So you only imagine playing in a different language. A lot of people actually learn English by playing video games, a lot of the gamers. But you will have so much more reach if you localize the game instead of just purely translating. And needless to say, I think that the top genres are also casual, more social games as well. We do like to play with people, and that's why some mid-core PvP also has a lot of success there.
All right.
Yeah, Brazil is generally like the number 2 country in usage for us. So like most of our games, Brazil is like the second biggest, not in revenue, but like in usage. Yeah, a lot of that. So we pay attention to that. We obviously, our IP is big in Latin America, so the anime stuff is big in Latin America as well. So that kind of helps. But it's tough, like, to find a way to generate revenue. Well, we can adjust the prices. We work with Google. Google, if you talk to Google, they'll help you, like, to adjust your prices in a way that works for them. So we kind of lower the price and round up and whatever. And like, there's a little thing that you can do to help. But it's worth paying attention there because it's such a big market there.
And it's funny that we've actually run out of time just at the moment we were about to talk about the forgotten continent, which is Africa. So who here has done events in Uganda? Raise your hand. Lauri, can you tell us more about that?
So we started a couple of development projects, one in Uganda, one in Cambodia, testing game learning in rural schools. We just visited Uganda in June and tested a bunch of games, among them obviously Big Bang Legends, but also other learning games that we think are cool in schools where the kids had never seen a tablet or a smartphone or computer in their lives. And that's one of the reasons why I feel like, when you get that connection going with people, the cultural differences sort of melt away, because seeing these kids who had no previous understanding of even the technology that we're employing to deliver these games. And I shot a video 90 seconds after the kids got their hands on the game, and they're completely blown away by it. And there's like 24 of these kids just playing the game and shooting the atoms, and they figured out the mechanisms immediately, and they figured out the whole stuff. And I think that's at the end of the day, I think there's a huge potential, especially in Africa, because there's like a bunch of people who are amazing human beings who don't have the access to the same kinds of tools and devices and education and possibilities we do. But we have lots of initiatives that are now changing all of that. And it's going to be a huge thing when that starts to escalate. And I think it's also interesting for us in the Western countries that we shouldn't feel too laid back about it, because I mean, if we sort of get complacent, those guys are actually going to overtake us in the next 10 to 15 years. And having seen that firsthand, the excitement in the eyes of these kids, I'm certain that that's going to happen soon.
All right. I'm not sure if we have time for questions.
Perhaps we could fit in one question or two just before we break for lunch. Are there any questions for our panel? Here's one here. Look, I'll take my mic straight in.
Hey, Josh from Bango. I've got a question for Jefferson and Sabrina about Brazil, or the Latin American market in general. You both sort of said that you see very high usage but very low revenues. And one of the things that Bango's found is that games developers and app stores don't really realize that a lot of the boundaries there are the payment methods rather than the IP usage or the interest in the game. So they see high usage but not high download. So I think, how do you guys sort of tackle the issue of a lack of credit card payments and the lack of options for payments in the market?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the biggest problems. Like, Google works a lot in that in Brazil. Apple not as much, but Google is putting a lot of effort in adding. Brazil has all these crazy arcane payment methods, and Google is putting them all into Google Play. So, and Android is the biggest user base anyway, so they probably can move the needle. Yeah, I think that the difficulty, but obviously payment is one thing. Obviously, ads is something that helps too. So that's kind of one of the things we try to do there. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, if I knew the answer, then we would be doing it. I think we're still trying to figure it out. Even though the fact I'm from there doesn't really help that much. It's a crazy place. I mean, we can understand the problem, but it's hard to find when the solution is going to be easy. I don't know if Sabrina has some more insight.
No, I agree completely, and that's payment methods is a big deal, because credit card is not just for everyone. You just can't get it that easily, or maybe you can, but we don't know how to handle our finances that well. But there are other ways to be creative, right? You see, we walk on the street, there's a lot of newsstands, and you physically buy cards and codes that you can put it in the game. So I think it depends also how much you can invest in doing alternative ways of reaching the same. And secondly, it's about price points as well, right? And things being affordable, and you actually feeling that you can invest, because it shifted from the premium that you would just buy the game and you just play it to, oh my God, now I have to pay to progress. What is that? And now it's oh, I'm actually going to invest on this because it's a service, and I'm just going to be playing this for a very long time. So it took a while for the mentality to shift, and I think it's happening right now. And I think there's this enormous space for for companies to just put their games there. I think King games are very successful there as well in source of revenue, and there's a lot of options. But it's what he said. It's hard with payment methods, and I think the advice, just go there. There are events. Brazil Game Show has 150,000 people in 2 days of event. So just, it's worth going and having a look and how they behave, because it's a massive consumer country.
Yeah, and like I said, Google puts a lot of time into Brazil. So if you know people at Google, like go talk to them too, because they definitely think a lot about this. And I think they're going to be probably the ones that they're going to help us correct that first. So yeah, if you know anybody at Google, like they can also probably connect you with that, some of those answers.
And I think that these are two very good general points, actually. Globally, payment is a key issue because credit card is not popular in the majority of countries. And if you look at China, 80% of payments come from Alipay and UnionPay. So completely different mindset. And this is something that the people are not going to change for you. So yes, gaming is a universal language, but the way I pay, I'm not going to change that just because I like a game. And this is true for most human beings. And then the other things is that makes sense internationally is how you make your partners locally and visit these countries. Because indeed, in the payment in Brazil, most people tend to pay by carrier billing, but you need a partner because once you get paid, you also need to get the money out of Brazil. And with their banking laws, that's another equation entirely, and we don't have time for that.
Thank you very much. I think we probably better wrap up there. So a round of applause, please, for Pascal, Don, Jefferson, Larry, Sabrina, and Stanislav.